I'd always wanted to take a break from the hustle and bustle of city life, so when the opportunity to stay in a mansion for a few weeks came up, I jumped at it. It wasn't a vacation, per se, but more of a retreat to clear my mind. The place was huge, way more than I needed, but the price was right, and the scenery was unbeatable. The first day was pretty uneventful. I arrived, settled in, and unpacked my stuff. As I was lugging my suitcase up the grand staircase, I noticed a bird through one of the large windows. It was just a simple bird, but it seemed to hover in the air for a moment longer than normal, almost as if it was watching me. I shrugged it off as nothing more than a trick of the light and continued with my unpacking. The mansion itself was like something out of a movie. High ceilings, elaborate woodwork, and rooms that seemed to go on forever. There was even a library filled with dusty old books, some of which looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. I spent the first few days exploring, enjoying the quiet and trying to figure out how to use the ancient appliances. It wasn't until the third day that I noticed something odd. I'd left my keys on the kitchen counter the night before, but in the morning they were on the dining room table. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe I had moved them and just forgotten. But then it happened again the next day with my phone this time. I started to feel a little uneasy, but convinced myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. The real trouble began about a week into my stay. I was sitting in the library, flipping through an old journal I had found tucked away on one of the higher shelves. It was filled with cryptic entries, written in a spidery hand that was hard to read. Most of it seemed like mundane diary stuff, but there were occasional references to the Watcher and the other side that gave me chills. That's when I noticed the bird again. This time it was perched on the windowsill, staring straight at me. I got up to shoo it away, but it didn't move. It just sat there, its eyes following me as I walked across the room. I tapped on the glass and it finally flew off, but the encounter left me feeling strangely unsettled. Things started to escalate after that. I would catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned, there was nothing there. I started hearing faint whispers at night, but I could never make out what they were saying. I told myself it was just the wind or the house settling, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. One evening, as I was getting ready for bed, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. At first, everything seemed normal, but then I noticed that my reflection's eyes weren't following my movements. It was a brief moment, just a split second, but it was enough to make my heart skip a beat. I rubbed my eyes and looked again, but everything seemed normal. Over the next few days, my reflection continued to act independently. It would wave when I wasn't moving, or make faces that I wasn't making. I tried to avoid mirrors as much as possible, but in a house full of reflective surfaces, it was nearly impossible. The final straw came when my reflection spoke to me. I was in the hallway, passing by a large mirror, when I heard it whisper my name. Alex. It was my voice, but it didn't come from my mouth. I felt a chill run down my spine and ran out of the house without looking back. I don't know what's happening to me. Maybe it's just stress, or maybe there's something about that mansion that messes with your mind. All I know is that ever since that trip, I can't look at my reflection the same way. It's like there's another version of me, trapped on the other side of the glass, and it's watching, waiting. I'm not much of a writer, but something happened to me that I need to get off my chest. It's been haunting me ever since, and I can't shake the feeling that I need to share it. A few months back, I decided to take a trip to an old mansion with my 3 friends, Mark, Dave, and Joe. We had always heard rumors about this place, like how it was once owned by some rich guy who mysteriously disappeared. It wasn't too far from where we lived, just a couple of hours' drive, so we thought it'd be fun to check it out. The mansion itself was huge, with tall, imposing gates and overgrown gardens. The place had an eerie charm to it, but nothing that would make you think twice about entering. We got there late in the afternoon, the sun just starting to set, casting long shadows across the driveway. As soon as we walked in, we split up to explore. Mark went upstairs to check out the bedrooms. Dave wandered into what looked like a library, and Joe said he was going to find the kitchen. I decided to stick to the main hall and take a look around there. About an hour passed, and we all regrouped in the main hall to share what we'd found. Mark seemed a bit off, though. He was walking with a limp, and I noticed his right leg looked strange, like it was bent the wrong way. When I asked him about it, he just shrugged it off and said he'd tripped over something upstairs. We continued exploring, sticking together this time. As we walked through the dimly lit hallways, I kept glancing at Mark's leg. The more I looked, the more it freaked me out. It wasn't just bent, it was completely inverted. But Mark seemed totally unfazed, as if nothing was wrong. Suddenly, Dave suggested we check out the basement. None of us had thought to look there yet, and it seemed like the kind of place where we might find something interesting. We found the door to the basement at the back of the house, hidden behind a heavy curtain. The stairs creaked under our weight as we descended into the darkness. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The basement was surprisingly clean, almost as if someone had been taking care of it. We walked further in, and that's when things got weird. Joe, who was leading the way, suddenly stopped. He turned to us, his face pale. "Guys, I think we should leave," he said. Before we could react, the lights in the basement flickered and went out completely. Panic set in, and we scrambled to find our way back to the stairs. In the chaos, I lost track of Mark. I called out his name, but there was no response. When we finally made it back to the main hall, Mark was nowhere to be found. We searched the entire mansion, but he had vanished without a trace. The rest of us were in shock. We decided to call the police, but when they arrived, they didn't find any sign of Mark. What's even stranger is that when they asked about our trip, they said I had come to the mansion alone. There were no records of Dave or Joe being there, and they claimed they had never even heard of Mark. I know what I saw. I know what happened, but it seems like nobody believes me. Mark's disappearance remains a mystery, and I'm left questioning my own sanity. Was it all in my head? Did I really go there alone? I don't have the answers, but I needed to get this story out there. Maybe someone will believe me. I remember that day like it was yesterday. It was a gloomy Saturday morning, and I was lounging around the house when I suddenly felt this intense urge to visit my grandma. It was strange because I hadn't thought about her in months, maybe even a year. When I mentioned it to my parents, they looked surprised. They exchanged a glance before my mom asked, "Why the sudden interest? You haven't mentioned Grandma in a while." I shrugged, feeling a bit sheepish. "I don't know, I just feel like I need to see her." They seemed a bit puzzled, but didn't object. I quickly packed a small bag with some clothes, toiletries, and a few snacks for the road. As I drove, the sky grew darker, and the trees lining the highway looked more twisted and eerie than usual. It was almost as if the universe was trying to warn me, but I brushed off the feeling. Grandma's house was on the outskirts of town, isolated and surrounded by dense woods. It was an old, creepy house that always gave me the chills, but I loved my grandma, so I ignored the unease. When I finally pulled up, the house looked exactly the same, a bit run down, with peeling paint and overgrown weeds, but it still had that cozy charm I remembered from my childhood. I knocked on the door, expecting a bit of a wait, but to my surprise, Grandma opened it almost immediately. She looked just like I remembered her, small, with white hair tied back in a bun, and a warm, welcoming smile that made my heart swell with nostalgia. Come in," she said, her voice cheerful. As I stepped inside, the familiar scent of baked goods and old wood filled my nostrils. The living room was just as I remembered, with its faded floral wallpaper, antique furniture, and shelves filled with knickknacks. We sat down, and I felt an overwhelming sense of comfort and belonging. We spent the afternoon catching up. Grandma seemed genuinely happy to see me, and I was glad I made the trip. We talked about family, old memories, and she even shared some stories I had never heard before. She made my favorite cookies chocolate chip with a hint of cinnamon, just like she used to when I was a kid. Everything felt so right, so normal. But as the evening wore on, I started noticing something off about her. It was small things at first. Her smile would fade in and out, and sometimes she looked confused, like she was trying to remember something, but couldn't quite grasp it. I chalked it up to old age and didn't think much of it. We continued talking, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Then things got really strange. We were sitting in the living room and I looked away for just a moment. When I looked back, her face seemed different. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light. Then I realized her features were changing. Her eyes, her nose, her mouth, everything was shifting subtly but unmistakably. It was like watching someone morph right in front of me. I blinked, hoping my eyes were playing tricks on me, but the changes became more pronounced. Before I knew it, I wasn't looking at my grandma anymore. I was looking at my grandpa. My heart started pounding in my chest, and a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. My grandpa had died when I was a kid, so this didn't make any sense. I felt paralyzed with shock and fear. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I asked, my voice trembling, "Grandma, are you okay?" She or he looked at me with a puzzled expression and said in a voice that sounded strangely like both of them, "Your grandma died 3 years ago." To this day, I have no idea what happened. Maybe I imagined it, or maybe it was some kind of weird prank. But whatever it was, it scared the hell out of me. I haven't been able to go back to that house since, and the memory still haunts me. Every time I think about it, I feel that same chill, that same sense of unreality. I just can't shake it. I remember that day like it was yesterday. My girlfriend, Emily, and I decided to go hiking. It was a sunny Saturday morning, perfect for a day out in nature. We had been planning this trip for weeks, excited to explore a new trail Wed heard about from friends. The trail was known to be a bit off the beaten path, but we loved the idea of some solitude and adventure. As we started hiking, everything felt perfect. The trail was beautiful, winding through dense forests and alongside a bubbling creek. We took our time, enjoying the scenery and each other's company. After a couple of hours, we found a nice spot to rest and have a snack. Emily took out her phone to take some pictures, and we even took a few selfies together, laughing and goofing around. We packed our backpacks with snacks, water, and the usual hiking gear, and drove to the trailhead. The drive was uneventful, filled with laughter and our favorite songs playing on the radio. When we arrived, we noticed that there were only a few cars in the parking lot. It seemed like we'd have the place mostly to ourselves, which was exactly what we wanted. After our break, we continued hiking. That's when things started to get weird. We noticed that the trail was getting narrower and more overgrown. The trees seemed to close in around us, and the light dimmed, even though it was still early afternoon. We pressed on, thinking it would open up again soon. Then, out of nowhere, I saw a lady cross the road in front of us. It wasn't just that she crossed the road, it was how she did it. She moved so quickly, it was like a blur. 1 second she was there, and the next she was gone. I stopped in my tracks, my heart pounding. "Did you see that?" I asked Emily. She looked at me, confused. "See what?" "That woman, she crossed the road in front of us. She was so fast it didn't seem real." Emily shook her head. "I didn't see anyone. Are you okay?" I nodded, trying to shake off the unease. "Yeah, maybe I'm just tired." We continued hiking, but I couldn't get the image out of my head. The rest of the hike was uneventful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. When we finally made it back to the parking lot, it was nearly empty. Only our car and one other remained. As we packed up our gear, I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. Pulled it out and saw an unknown number calling. Normally, I'd ignore it, but something compelled me to answer. "Hello?" I said. There was a brief pause, and then I heard Emily's voice. "Help me," she whispered. My blood ran cold. "Emily, where are you?" The line went dead. I turned to Emily, who was standing right next to me, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. "What's wrong?" she asked. "I just got a call from you." Her eyes widened further. "That's not possible." I showed her my phone, the unknown number still displayed on the screen. "It was your voice. You said, 'Help me.'" and then the line went dead. We stood there in stunned silence, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Then, without warning, Emily grabbed my arm. "We need to leave. Now." We jumped into the car and sped away from the trailhead. As we drove, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The road was winding and narrow, surrounded by dense forest. My mind kept replaying the image of the woman crossing the road at lightning speed. Then, just as we were rounding a bend, I saw her again. The same woman, moving impossibly fast, crossed the road right in front of us. I swerved to avoid her, my heart pounding in my chest. When I looked back, she was gone. Emily and I didn't say a word for the rest of the drive home. When we finally pulled into our driveway, we were both shaken and exhausted. We went inside, locked all the doors, and sat down to try and process what had happened. That night, as I lay in bed, my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. My heart raced as I answered it. "Hello?" There was silence on the other end, then a faint whisper. "Help me." It was Emily's voice again. I turned to her, lying next to me, sound asleep. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them making any sense. I didn't sleep at all that night, and the next day, we decided to report the incident to the authorities. The police took our statement but didn't seem convinced. They said there was no evidence of anything unusual and suggested it might have been a prank or our imaginations playing tricks on us. But I know what I saw, and I know what I heard. To this day, I can't explain it. Emily and I haven't gone hiking since, and I've changed my phone number twice. The calls have stopped, but the memory lingers. Every time I think about that day, a chill runs down my spine. I don't know who that woman was or how she moved so fast. I don't know how Emily's voice ended up on those calls. But I do know one thing. Something out there isn't right, and you'll never forget it.